Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more the Prose Edda. So yeah, we'll be picking up talking about the ship Skidbladnir, Loki, and all kinds of things. So let's jump into this. Part 43, the ship Skidbladnir. Then Gangleri asked, "What can be said about Skidbladnir since it is the best of ships?" "Is there no ship its equal, or none as large?" I said, "Skidbladnir is the best of ships, and it was both the built with the finest craftsmanship. But Naglfar, the largest ship, is owned by Muspel. Dwarves, the son of Ivaldi, built Skidbladnir and gave it to Frey. That ship is so large that it can accommodate all the Aesir, along with their weapons and their war gear, and a good wind blows whenever the sail is raised, no matter where it is headed. The ship is made of so many different pieces and with so much cunning that when it is not being used to travel on the sea, it can be folded up like a piece of cloth and placed in a pouch." Number 44. Thor and Loki begin their journey to Giant Land. Then Gangleri said, "Skidbladnir is a fine ship, and a powerful magic must be called upon before something like it is crafted. Tell me, has Thor never been in a situation where he encountered so much strength and power that he was overwhelmed by might or magic superior to his own?" I replied, "I expect that there are few others who could answer your question, even though many situations have seemed difficult to Thor. Although some things, because of their power or their strength, have prevented Thor from being victorious, there is no need to tell about them. Not least because everybody ought to keep in mind that there are so many examples where Thor is the mightiest." Then Gangleri said, "It seems to me that this time I have asked something that no one can answer." Justice High replied, "We have heard reports that seem reasonable to us, or unreasonable to us, yet here, close by, sits the man who can give a true account. You can trust what he says because he has never spoken falsely, and he will not start now." Then Gangleri responded, "I will stand here and listen for a solution. Otherwise, I call you beaten because you are unable to answer my question." Third then spoke. It is obvious that he wants to know these tales, even though we take no pleasure in telling them. You, however, must now keep quiet. It started when Thor, the charioteer, was traveling with his goats, accompanied by the god Loki. Towards dusk, they came to the house of a farmer and arranged lodging for the night. In the evening, Thor took his goats and slaughtered them both. They were then flayed and carried to the pot. After they had been cooked, Thor and his companions sat down to their evening meal. Thor invited the farmer and his wife and children to join him. The farmer's son was named Thialfi, and his daughter was named Roskava. Next, Thor spread out the goat skins away from the fire and said that the farmer and his household should throw the bones onto the skins. Thialfi, the farmer's son, took the thigh bone of one of the goats and wedging in his knife, broke the bone to reach the marrow. Thor stayed the night, and just before dawn he got up and dressed. He reached for his hammer Mjolnir and, lifting it up, consecrated the goat skins. The goats stood up, but one of them was lame in its hind leg. Thor noticed this and suspected that the farmer or one of his household had mistreated the goat's bones. Then he realized that its thigh bone was broken, and there was no need to make a long story of it. Everybody can imagine how frightened the farmer became as he watched Thor's eyebrows sink down low over his eyes. The small part of Thor's eyes that was visible was a sight that alone could have killed. Thor's hands clenched the shaft of his hammer until his knuckles whitened. As might be expected, the farmer and all his household began to wail. Begging for mercy, they offered in return everything they owned. When Thor saw their fear, his anger passed. Calming down, he took from them their children, Thalfi and Roskva, as compensation. They became Thor's bond servants and follow him ever since. Part 45. Thor encounters Skrymir in the forest. Thor left the goats behind and began the trip east into Giantland, all the way to the sea. From there, he continued out over the deep ocean. When he came to land, he went ashore, and with him were Loki, Thjalfi, and Roskva. After they had traveled a little while, they came to a large forest. They continued walking that whole day until dark. Thjalfi, who was faster than anybody else, carried Thor's food bag. They were low on supplies. When it became dark, they looked for a place to spend the night and came across a very large hall. At one end was a door as wide as the hall itself, and they sought quarters for the evening. But the middle of the night there was a powerful earthquake. The ground heaved under them and the house shook. Thor stood up and called to his companions. They searched and found a side room on the right, towards the middle of the hall, and they went in. Thor placed himself in the doorway, and the others, who were scared, stayed behind him further inside. Thor held the hammer by its handle, intending to defend himself. Then they heard a loud noise and a roaring din. At sunrise, Thor went outside and saw a man lying in the forest a short distance from him. The man snored heavily as he slept, and he was not little. Thor then thought he understood the noise he had heard during the night. He put on his belt of strength, and divine power began to swell in him. But just at that moment, the man awoke and quickly stood up. It is said that for once Thor was too startled to strike with the hammer. Instead, he asked the man his name, and the other called himself Skrymir. And I do not need, he said, to ask your name. I know you are Thor of the Aesir. But have you dragged away my glove? Skrymir then reached out and picked up his glove. Thor now saw that during the night he had mistaken the glove for a hall. As for the side room, that was the glove's thumb. Skrymir asked if Thor wanted to have his company on the journey, and Thor said yes. Then Skrymir took his food bag, untied it, and started to eat his breakfast. Thor and his companions did the same thing elsewhere. Skrymir next suggested that they pool their provisions, and Thor agreed. Skrymir tied together all the provisions in one bag and threw them over his shoulder. He went ahead during the day, taking rather large strides. Later, towards evening, Skrymir found them a place for the night under a great oak tree. Skrymir then told Thor that he wanted to lie down to sleep, but you take the food bag and prepare your evening meal. Next, Skrymir fell asleep, snoring loudly, and Thor took the food bag, intending to untie it. There is this to tell which may seem unbelievable, but Thor could not untie a single knot, nor was he able to loosen any of the straps. None was any looser than when he started. When Thor realized that his effort was being wasted, he became angry. Gripping the hammer Mjolnir with both hands, he strode with one foot out in front to where Skrymir lay and struck him on the head. But Skrymir awoke and asked whether a leaf from the tree had fallen on his head and whether he had eaten and were preparing to bed down. Thor replied that they were getting ready to go to sleep. They then moved to a place under another oak, and it can truly be said that it was not possible to sleep without fear. In the middle of the night, Thor could hear that Skrymir was sleeping soundly, the forest thundering with the sound of his snoring. Thor stood up and went over to him. Quickly he raised his hammer and with a hard blow struck Skrymir at the midpoint of his skull. He felt the hammer sink deeply into the head. But at that instant Skrymir awoke and said, "What now? Has some acorn fallen on my head? What's new with you, Thor?" Thor quickly moved back and said that he had just awakened, adding that it was the middle of the night and there was still time to sleep. Then Thor resolved that if he could get close enough to strike a third blow, he would arrange matters so that the meeting would be their last one. Thor now lay awake, watching for Skrymir to fall asleep. A little before dawn, hearing that Skrymir was sleeping, Thor stood up and, running towards Skrymir, raised his hammer and with all his might struck Skrymir on the temple. The hammer sank up to its shaft, but then Skrymir sat up, brushed off the side of his head, and asked, "Is there some bird sitting on the tree above me? It seemed to me that to I awoke that some leaves or twigs from the branches had fallen on my head." "Are you awake, Thor? It is time to get up and get dressed. You don't have a long way to go to reach the stronghold, which is called Utgard. I have heard you whispering among yourselves that I am no small man, and that you will see still larger men if you go to Utgard. Now I will give you some good advice. Do not act arrogantly. The retainers of Utgarda will not tolerate bragging from such small fry as you. Your other choice is to turn back, and in my opinion, that would be the best thing for you to do. But if you intend to continue, then head for the east. My path now leads me northward to those mountains that you can now see." Skrymir took the food bag and threw it over his back. He turned sharply and headed north to the forest, leaving the others. In this parting, there is no report that the Aesir mentioned they were looking forward to meeting them again. So yeah, we'll go ahead and end this episode on that. Yeah, we see that the gods, as mighty and as powerful as they are, they're not, you know, mighty above all. There are some things that they cannot simply overcome. We know Ragnarok is supposed to be the downfall of the Aesir and the Norse gods. So there are creatures and beings that are much more powerful. And we just saw a, such a moment with um, Skrymir when he encounters Thor, his two bond servants, and I think Loki was the other traveler, the four of them. They were all traveling along and ended up using the giant's glove as because they thought it was a hall, it was so big. That's what they recognized it as, but it turned out, hey, it was this giant's glove. You know, he tried to strike the giant several times on the head, and it just barely did enough to just wake him. He's like, "What's going on?" So he hits the giant once on the head, mid skull, temple. So yeah, and you know, mid skull is one of the harder points. He probably hit him in in the skull twice. First time, nothing, and it just woke the guy. He's like, "Did a leaf just hit me?" to show how much more powerful Skrymir was beyond Thor himself. Second time he hits a mid skull, he's like, what was that? And they said it barely sank in a little bit, and then he hits him in the temple, which is supposed to be one of your softest points in the skull, and it just sinks up to the hilt. So it's like you can imagine the hammer just going in, and the actual metallic part of Mjolnir just sinking up, and all that's sticking out is the handle. The giant's just like, yeah, I get hit by a leaf, some twigs. And if you think about it, as the giant is so much bigger, even if Mjolnir goes in to his temple that little bit, that's just barely penetrating the skin. So it's like, eh, eh, eh. It's like tapping your finger with holding the nail out so you don't hit the nail on your temple. But yeah, just a slight tap with your finger on the temple. That's what it was likely felt by the giant. Do the same on the mid skull. Yeah. So he's, so beyond the power of Thor. Even though he was just showing Thor some kindness, he's like, I shall travel with you. We shall divide up our provisions. And he would just travel with Thor and his companions. Thor, Loki, and Thor's companions. Yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.